Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Laura Owen, and I am at San Diego State University, the Executive Director for the Center for Equity and Post-Secondary Attainment. We're really excited that you were able to join us this afternoon for our series in equitable career development and counseling. And for this webinar, Over the Rainbow, a career development group for LGBTQ plus teens webinar. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers, and then I'm going to turn it over to our special guest hosts who have been doing this whole series and did our special issue journal. So we're really fortunate today to have Isabella Herrera and Anita Colburn with us. Isabella is a psychotherapist dedicated to helping individuals learn to celebrate the magic inside them. Driven to spearhead change, Isabella uses her passion for people to transcend research and advocacy. Her clinical work in private practice emphasizes women's self-esteem and identity empowerment, and her focus on storytelling and public speaking helps mentor students to make their big dreams more accessible. Isabella is a nationally certified counselor, holds a master's in clinical mental health counseling, and a child and adolescent emphasis from Northwestern University. Isabella, we're excited to have you here this morning. It's afternoon. It is afternoon now, even on the West Coast. Dr. Colburn is a clinical training director at Northwestern University's counseling program. She's worked in full-time and part-time clinical practice since 1998. She's been providing clinical supervision to licensed-bound counselors since 2005. As a counselor educator, she's taught in face-to-face and online programs at both the doctoral and the master's level. Her own master's degree was in rehabilitation counseling, and she's worked in private practice as a career counselor for more than 10 years. Her counseling experiences have primarily included work with women, sexual minorities, couples, and teens and parents in foster care systems. Prior to becoming a counselor, Dr. Colburn worked as an independent executive recruiter and personal consultant. Her research interests include online counselor education pedagogy, LGBTQ, counseling and supervision competencies, spiritual integration in counseling and supervision, and social justice issues. Dr. Colburn, we're thrilled to have you with us today. And I would love to now turn the time over. We have two of our three editors for our special issue that we have the journal and this entire webinar series. We have Dr. Renee Mays and Dr. Paul Harris. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Hello, everyone, and greetings on behalf of the co-editors for this issue. I'm Renee Mays. My esteemed colleague and family, Paul Harris, is also joining us, and I will also say greetings from Eric Hines. We're so thrilled about this special issue and glad that it is out and that we have the opportunity to have webinars to kind of take a deeper dive into each article. So I put a link for the special issue in the chat, and I will also add a link to the blog that Isabella and Anita wrote that corresponds with what they will be sharing today. And I also just want to say happy Pride. This is a wonderful, the timing of this is so serendipitous, and what a wonderful time to have a conversation, say gay and trans lives matter, and to really appreciate Marsha P. Johnson, and Sylvia Rivera, who got Pride Month all kicked off with the Stonewall Uprising. So I'm delighted for this moment. I'm delighted for this month, and I'm absolutely excited for the words that we are about to hear from our wonderful presenters. So I will turn it over to you all and sit back and get excited and write questions or thoughts down as you all are about to present some really thought-provoking material. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having us. We are ecstatic to be here and to be voices of change, spreading all this information to all of you today. So we really appreciate you welcoming us into the space. So let me get my screen all up and ready.
Isabella, can you increase your volume a little bit? You're a little quiet. Make sure everybody can hear us.
Can you hear me now? A little better? Yeah, okay, perfect. Well, thanks for letting me know about that. All right. You have this. Are you seeing the right thing? There we go. Can you see that okay? So thank you again for welcoming us. We are Isabella and Dr. ANC, or Anita, as you all are talking about her. I will toss it over to her in just a second so we can hear a little bit more about our group. But I do want to tell you how appreciative we are of being here and being able to spread this information to all of you today.
All right, yes, thank you everybody for having us. And this topic is really near and dear to both of us. As you might have put together, Isabella and I have been working together as she worked through her master's program at Northwestern and has since graduated. I have been on my own journey of coming out as an LGBT advocate ally for quite a number of years, and have a personal interest in the topic as I have several family members who identify as gay or lesbian, and have had the kind of responsibility and kind of privilege to bear witness to their own processes as we grew up together, cousins and sibling. So being able to watch how this was for them, watch their own processes of coming out, watch their own processes of getting caught up in some shaming, watched how their identities ended up impacting their own career decision making. So that's part of my interest. And then the other part of my interest, you heard a little bit in my introduction, I used to be an executive recruiter, so have always had a little bit of an interest in career counseling. So those were the original drivers. And then I met Isabella, who's wonderful. You'll see that in just a moment. And we started working on this project together. So we're just really, really pleased to bring it to you, and quite grateful for the special issue and for the work that's gone into it. So we are going to today talk a little bit about the marginalization that LGBTQ youth experience and how this impacts their own identity development. And specifically how career decision-making can get really put off to the side as teens who identify as LGBTQ+, kind of don't have enough room to do everything that they need to do for their own career planning, because their energy is taken up figuring out this identity piece. And that's a little bit true for all teens, but much more true for LGBTQ+ teens. And so then we'll talk about what we've learned about career group counseling and how we were able to put together something from career group counseling theory with what we know about this population group, and hopefully putting it together in a way that we hope is going to make some serious change going forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. ANC. And like you said, you know, we all know it's tough to be a teen. There are so many things that happen during adolescence in terms of like physiological change, like you're sweaty, you're stressed. You know that there's a bunch of stuff that you want to do in your life, and there's a lot of pressure for you to perform and to achieve things. And things just get a lot more stressful for people who identify as LGBTQ because there's that identity piece. A lot of people who are in the community say that they basically knew like their interests were different way before high school, but we know that high school is one of those markers for a lot of sexual exploration or just understanding what like gender might mean for a person. So in these communities, the people who are learning more things about themselves, they're still not really able to act on this all the time because of the huge stigma and social standards that are being set by their peers, by society, by everything that we consume around us. So even within like an LGBTQ community or someone who wants to be true to their identity and feels the freedom to do so, there's still that pressure of like, what does queerness mean to me? Like in my experience with clients and younger clients especially, one of the things that always comes up is like, if I don't talk about my identity all the time, if I'm not this beacon of pride to my peers at my school, am I really being true to who I am? Or am I embracing who I am? So we see this very binary concept of like, I need to be silent about my identity, or I need to be the loudest person in the room. And that's a lot of pressure for a teenager. That's a lot of pressure for anybody. And it also sets the standard for defining what our identity is to everybody else, not just yourself. And again, that's a lot of pressure to face as a teenager, especially. And when we don't have these positive role models, these questions are kind of left unanswered. There's not really anybody who might be able to say, like, you're not alone. You're not the only person who's wondering about these things. And you're not the only person who needs to define, or even like sort of discover more than define, what they identify as or where they feel most comfortable. And when we don't have that and have someone to make it feel okay, you think that like, well, that one movie I saw, that must be what it means to be LGBTQ, or the pamphlet I read at the doctor's office, you know. So the pieces that you consume. And I read this wild statistic that only 20% of the stuff that we consume now is actually centric on LGBTQ stories, which is ridiculous. And I think it's only ridiculous to us who are like very immersed in content from the community, that we're so familiar with these stories and we hear them all the time and we're looking for ways to amplify them. But that's not everybody's experience. You know, like there are people out there who aren't hearing anything, don't actually know of anyone around them who is like them and loves like them and sees the world in the same way that they do. So without these role models, these are limitations that these students are placing on themselves. Because if there's nobody out there who lives like me, who has this great job and this great position, why does that make me that one person that can actually attain that? And if we look at the numbers, like 70% of LGBTQ youth in this chart over here said that they felt way better about their identity when they saw that there were people in companies who identified as LGBTQ and they had these positions of power. And we know they exist, but off the top of your head, how many executives do you know that openly identify as LGBTQ? So representation is really difficult to find. And without those examples out there, people are consuming the gender norms, the internalized homophobia, what their community is held on, and using that to gauge their identity. And that might not always be a positive thing. So we know that teens especially are very influenced by their peers and what their friends are doing, but there's data out there that shows that really just impacts day-to-day behavior, but adults are the ones who are impacting these kids' values. So not only like what they see about the world, but how they see themselves and how they want to go forward in life. So when we place heteronormativity, right, as a standard, and we ask our kids questions like, well, are there any girls you like in school? Or is there something else you can do because maybe that's too girly for you? We're basically setting this standard and saying that any experiences that exist outside of that are the difference. Like being LGBTQ, that's a change that needs to occur. So I think we also need to shift our understanding of gender and sexuality. We are no longer making it okay, or I think in the future, we should no longer make it okay to set that as like the baseline, like heterosexual behaviors as baseline, and anything outside of that as something that deviates from that baseline. I think it's important for us to emphasize with the people that we know, with our clients, with our students, that identity is dimensional, that sexuality and gender are not the same, and that there are like facets within beautiful facets of how people express love and love each other that maybe we don't even know the name of yet. And you hear that a lot, like that discourse of, well, we just keep adding letters to the alphabet and people are never going to really know what they want. But that's a great thing, right? Isn't it amazing that we're embracing how much variety we have out there of how people can express affection and care and identify? So being open to that and making sure that we're not falling into those same sorts of comments and patterns, and we're being that first person to stand up for people in these communities and say something about it, that is super key. We also need to remember that there may be people who choose to live as their identity and embrace their identity, and that inherently forcibly outs them. So people, specifically trans people or people who identify as non-binary, who may experience like physical changes that are a lot more out there and obvious than someone who is like, say like asexual, who doesn't necessarily have to tell anyone, or it's not going to come up as much, or you can't see that on the outside. Those people in those experiences, they are being forcibly outed pretty much to everybody who takes a second to look at them or who knew them before their emergence. So that's also just something that we need to be mindful of and to take care of the people in those populations. Similarly, there are shocking, like really eye-opening statistics about marginalization in intersectionality, because we see that these are the people who are in marginalized communities within marginalized communities. And instead of us finding ways to help tease that apart and empower these people, the data is still showing us that the groups are being like re-victimized in a sense. So as much progress as we've made and as beautiful and empowering as we are helping our students and our peers and our loved ones become now, I urge everyone to ask ourselves, like, with this data in front of us, are we really making things better, easier, and accessible? Are we making big dreams accessible for LGBTQ teens in schools? The biggest thing is that we're not. We're trying to, but we see the data tells us that 70% of students report needing more from career counselors and more information about what to do about their futures, what deadlines look like, what opportunities look like. We also see an immense statistic of students who are LGBTQ asking for mental health help, looking for mental health help, and not really having access to that increasing need, helping that resolve. So there's something that we're still missing. We need to find out what that is. And I think that it's massive for all of us to realize that saying our pronouns at the beginning of a conversation isn't enough, right? Putting this really beautiful picture for Pride Month as like the profile picture, like we see all those companies do, and then they take it off next month. That's not enough. That's putting like a message out there, but it sort of feels like a box that we need to check off. And allyship is not a box. It's not a competency. Your curriculum is not a competency that you need to mention LGBTQ values and rights and experiences, one, and we can just forget about it. This is a lifelong journey, and it is a commitment that I think we all, just being here, are making sure that we're holding true to. And this is why we created Over the Rainbow.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Isabella. I think as we think about helping kids achieve their big dreams, right? We think about the role, primarily, I think about the role of school counselors and how much power they have, and maybe how much power they don't realize they have in talking about options after secondary school for students, right? How are students going around that career planning process, and what do you want to be when you grow up, and how can I help you achieve those goals? And the people with the privilege, who are the people in power, the school counselors, and all the other straight and LGBTQ identifying adults, are the ones who have the responsibility, right, to step in and identify those kids who have been minoritized, who are being marginalized, who are experiencing internalized shame as a result of what's going on around them, stigma-wise, and helping them figure out their career dreams. And that's what really this is about. So we know that career groups in general have been researched for quite some time. The first version of the Pyle and Hayden model actually came out in 2005. Richard Pyle wrote the first model about group career counseling. And so certainly those aspects of group counseling that exist in any kind of group, that experience of universality. So career groups will really normalize career concerns. And we know that career concerns really run the gamut. It's not just what do I want to do? What do I want to be? Maybe I won't be able to pursue that one thing I want. It's usually, especially for teenagers, there's too many choices, and how do I narrow it down, and how do I choose? Or there's too many choices and they involve going to college, and I'm not sure I'm smart enough, or I'm not sure I can afford it, and I don't know how that's going to happen, right? So that whole process of early career decision making, even broad career decision making before it gets too specific, is really where we need to start targeting with teenagers. And so the other benefit of using a group intervention is that it's much more efficient, right? You can work with 8 kids at a time instead of 1 kid at a time. And not just that, but sort of like that old commercial, the more that you work with more than one person, they're going to be telling their friends, and the news spreads quickly. So that's what we really hope for in a group intervention. We know that groups foster encouragement, mutual connection, so that it's not just that adult who's teaching the student something about how to explore a career or how to explore college options. It's really that adult helping facilitate a connection among the members of the group that will help them build a good support network for later, and you'll hear more about that later. And we also know that groups in particular are well suited for school settings just because of the sheer numbers. But what we also know is that what generally happens in high schools is career ends up being what my sister, who's a school counselor, tells me is called classroom guidance, where the school counselor goes in and they do a presentation to the class, and that feels like an efficient delivery of information. And in many ways, it is an efficient delivery of information. And in some ways, it isn't quite as effective, because if you don't have the discussion around the intervention, and if you don't make sure that everybody in the room is really connecting with what you're giving them, then you end up wasting some of that time and wasting some of that effort. You can go ahead to the next slide, please. So Pyle and Hayden in 2015 published their group career counseling work. I'll wait till we get to the next slide here. And it is an NCDA publication, National Career Development Association publication, and it's a monograph, and they present they call it a group career counseling model. And the monograph provides a pretty strong foundation for the use of career counseling groups, and takes people through, even people who are not specialists in group counseling, through the processes of sort of how to lead a group. And they divide out the stages of a group career intervention into 4 different stages of the group. And then within each stage, they suggest certain affective and certain cognitive goals. And so the cognitive goals sort of go along with what they expect the group members to be learning as they go along about different career possibilities, about the impact of personality and values, about how to explore salary, how to explore training requirements. Those sorts of things are the cognitive goals. And then the affective goals are the more internal process of how does each member of the group feel about their own place in the world? How are they feeling about their own ability to make appropriate career decisions that they feel are realistic? How are the group members feeling about the group process itself? How are they feeling about each other? How are they feeling in terms of their own individual connection to the group? So that's the basic Pyle and Hayden model. And then Isabella and I took this and really customized it for work with teenagers who identify as LGBTQ+. And the way that we customized it was primarily these two ways: to include LGBTQ role models in every single group session, and to cover both career interventions and also identity interventions in each individual session. And Isabella will talk about those in a moment, but broadly, we're taking the Pyle and Hayden model and taking some of it out and inputting some material around LGBTQ identity development and building safety and building social resilience for the students who identify in that group. Go ahead to the next slide, please. And then the third thing that we did a little bit differently in our customization of their model was to make sure that we were providing resources that everybody could get their hands on. So the resources that we suggest are all internet-based resources and resources that are customizable for the group. So we suggest a pre and post assessment, which is not only good for the student who's participating in the group, but it's also, of course, good from a program evaluation standpoint to be able to at least a little bit measure the impact of the group. If you are a school counselor trying to run this group, that program evaluation piece might be really important when it comes to administrators who want to see how did that group go and what did you really accomplish. And so those questions on the pre-post can be, you can use the ones that we've suggested, or you can take some away, or you can certainly add some that are going to make it useful for your own setting and your own environment. And then the rest of the resources really were internet-based resources. And as with any other time that you're going to share internet resources with a client or with students, you should certainly make sure you know what it is that you're sharing. Don't just send a link that somebody told you to send. Even the ones that we're telling you to send, you should go in and really look at them before you use them. But we wanted the resources to be accessible to everyone, so that would help keep the cost of the group really low. And the investment in the group is primarily an investment of time. And so Isabella is going to tell you a little bit more about the specifics of each group.
Oops. Okay. So like Dr. ANC said, each session will cover both career and identity workshops. So we are making sure that these groups highlight not only just professional advancement, but identity advancement. Like we mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, how important it is to have someone talk to you about what these experiences mean, what they're like, what these normalize these questions and this whole process. I think that's what this group is really going to be able to do, while still helping people who are already experiencing all these questions and all this pressure to really define the rest of their life, but before 18 years old. It's going to create a safer space for that to happen, and then help it be more informative of what actually is next for them. What does it have to look like? Schooling, does it have to be college? Can it be a career? Can I even afford to choose one or the other? Am I interested in one or the other? What options are out there for me? And what do I lean more towards in terms of my values, my strengths, my personality? What does that tell me? So not only talking about these experiences, but looking for data that's going to help inform their decisions. And also just how to prepare. A lot of people don't know about financial planning or networking. And like Dr. ANC said, it's sort of like a workshop and like a one and done kind of thing that, there are students who may benefit really well from those experiences, but then there are also students who may not have been there, physically or mentally, right? They might tune it out, or they might forget because people are human, and that tends to happen. So we want to just reiterate all of these different things and have mock interviews and just career workshops that help help them learn a lot more about what the next step is like. In terms of identity sessions, we really want to help students be able to define what being out means for them, not for their peers, not for what they consume outside of school, but for them, and knowing what their identity is like for them, and then when it is actually safe for them to come out. And one of the most special things, I think personally, one of my favorite parts of the group is those career role models that we would bring in as guest speakers. So we hope to have people from the community who have these positions be able to come and talk to the students and tell them about like what their journey was like and how they reached these heights, and teach them about what they do, right? Know that it's actually real, that people are doing something out there, and that they can do it too. Another thing that is really important to talk about during these identity sessions is how to know when a space is very affirming. So we have lists, right, of like historically LGBTQ plus friendly companies who have really affirmative policies. But then how do people know when there's a problem, when something is not something that they should be okay with in the workplace? Because sometimes we don't, well, actually often we don't get taught that kind of stuff. Like what is an inclusive policy and what does that look like? And how do I build a safe network of people, like making friends in the company or when I'm dating? So just helping people learn more about being an adult and all these things that you have to learn, I guess, the hard way, right? This workshop hopefully will be able to empower people to learn that in a safe space and from people who have already learned the hard way, right? So what's next for all of you and for this wonderful group? We really want you and people in the community to feel inspired to take action, to know that we in certain places, just by being here and by being able to discuss this information, hold a platform, and that we hold a certain level of privilege. And so it is sort of on us to be able to spread that fire and that information to these teens who are experiencing all of the stuff that we talked about today. So we want to be able to help promote resilience and belonging among LGBTQ teens. And we encourage that the same kind of groups happen within other marginalized communities. Like today, it might look like this, and tomorrow it might shift into something else. But we want to make sure that access to information and that resilience and belonging is spread just around. And if you feel so compelled, and we really, really hope you do, please test this out. Our article has more detailed information on how to host the group and more info on like just what specifics, like some of the things that Dr. Anstey was talking about. We'd love to hear your experiences with this whole process, and yeah, and help change the world, right? Thank you so much for your time and for your attention and for giving us this space to talk. Please use your power to spread kindness and help pave the way towards a more inclusive future. I sort of touched on that already, but I really, really hope, and I know Dr. Anstey feels the same way, that you recognize that you are a fire and you have all the power to help burst some flames out there for change. And so thank you for helping us be that first spark today. So thank you again.
Great, and we wanted to make sure that we left some time here really for some discussion. The group as it's set up, and the details are in the article, but it really does set teenagers up with some life skills, LGBTQ identifying students with some life skills. You heard Isabella mention budgeting. You heard her also mention safety and safe dating. We've got some information there about same-sex violence in dating that I think is also really important. So I'm glad that we have a bit of a small group here today, and I'm curious about general thoughts on this and what some of your own experiences might be in working with LGBTQ identifying youth around career planning.
Well, if I may, I just want to say thank you for this work. It's Dr. Mays articulated on the front end, and I just wanted to echo it on the back end that it's incredibly added value, and what timing indeed, as you mentioned, for this to be just reinforced and highlighted and lifted up at this point in time. So thank you. My question, just to lead the hopefully list of questions that we all have for this great work goes back to something you referenced regarding Kyle and Hayden's work. You talked about the affective and cognitive goals of the group. And I just thought it'd be neat to lean into a bit of the affective experiences that you had and have in this work. But I'm thinking particularly around just detailing this group experience for high schoolers. I suspect you had your own affective component, if you will, as you were working through it. And I just wondered what that has been like for you, what you're most proud of.
Yeah, thank you. That's and that could be a whole nother workshop, really. We could talk. I've actually written it in my head, the journey of an ally coming out. So yeah, in the end, it does really feel like a labor of love, and really only the tip of the iceberg, right? So I think it's important that we put together what we put together, and I love seeing it in print and can't wait to see some folks trying out the group. And yet, as Isabella said about the importance of saying, hi, I'm Anita, I identify as she, her, and let's have a conversation. That's a start, right? But it's certainly not enough. And I think one thing that I've really learned in doing this work, which isn't unlike other work, but the more I learn, the less I know, right? The more I learn, the less I know, the more passionately I feel about the work and personally committed to it, the more passionately I feel and the more personally committed to it I am, right? And so it becomes a cycle. And I think in my own work working with people around career issues, in my own work, like mentoring junior faculty and mentoring students, it's a similar process, right? You get something going, you catch something that you feel really strongly about, and then you just get more and more committed to it. I think one of the barriers that comes up, especially now, especially for gay and lesbian people, is, we've been talking about gay and lesbian people for so long. There's a lot of people in the rest of the world who say, well, haven't we done enough already for the gay and lesbian folks? And the trans folks have really not been talked about hardly ever at all, because they have gotten grouped in, and gender identity has nothing to do with sexual preference or romantic affections. And so there's still so much that even helpers are still learning, right? About how to make space and how to support, how to help others advocate, even, especially the silent types who aren't doing anything. There's an opportunity there to kind of catch them. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, Paul, but it is a journey, and it's a long journey of commitment. So
it was purposefully open so you could direct it as you wish. And so thank you for that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
I really just appreciate this work. You both, I think, hit the nail on the head, and that even as I look at school counselor training in particular, especially around post-secondary readiness, we don't talk about queer and trans identities. But we know, right, that once you graduate, one, you survive high school, maybe you thrive, but once you graduate, you move into a world that can often be hostile to you. Like, you enter a world of work that doesn't guarantee your safety, doesn't guarantee respect, like doesn't do all these things. And we need to have honest conversations with our students about it, not only so that they're prepared, but they can start thinking about or getting an understanding of how to assess places to see, is this a place that I'm going to be successful? Is this a place that I'm going to thrive? And even thinking about institutions of higher ed, we all know they're not safe. Many of them have safe spaces, and many of them also operate under heteronormativity and all sorts of other shenanigans, right? And I even in talking with my pre-service school counselors, I'm like, there's resources out there that help us at least get some kind of assessment on climate. Did you know about this? Like, are you sharing this with your students as at least a conversation starter? And they're like, I had no idea. Yeah, I mean, because we don't talk about this enough. So I'm so glad that your article in this webinar is happening. It's so needed, not only just out into the world, but even thinking about how it is integrated into professional practice, into training programs. And all of this comment to get to a question, which I think you all talk about a little bit. So we unfortunately live in a world where there are anti-gay, anti-trans bills that are popping up and impacting K through 12 schools. Mm-hmm. What advice or thoughts might you have for the school counselor who is like, I really want to do this. I'm a little nervous because this is the climate that I exist in. Like maybe they're in Florida or in Texas where it's a crime to be gay and trans. What advice or what workarounds, if you will, might you have for them to really be able to do this kind of work?
Mm-hmm. So there's no easy answer to the workaround, right? But what we do know about the life of a school counselor, and you know this, Renee, they have to involve administration. They have to. They'll be dead in the water if they don't get some buy-in from the beginning. And even the research shows that administrators and school counselors have been having this conversation about queer and trans students for a long time. And they still just kind of keep hitting dead ends when it comes to doing anything about it, right? Yes, thank you, Carla. I think it's so important that you have to involve them from the beginning. And I think just finding pockets, finding ways of doing things. One of the scenarios that Isabella and I imagined in putting together the group is maybe even holding the group like not on campus, right? Maybe finding a community space where that group can be held, depending on where you are. If you're in a very rural area, I live in Norfolk, Virginia. We have an LGBTQ Life Center down the street from me, so it's great. But not every environment has that. My sister's a school counselor in Mecklenburg, Virginia. There's hardly anything there. So really just working within your own environment to be able to find some people who identify in the community and garnering the assistance that you can from them. One thing you said, Renee, that I thought was so important is teaching students how to read the environment so that they know if it's really safe to come out in that certain environment. I think one mistake that counselors make and helpers make is those who are LGBTQ affirming, right? Queer and trans affirming. We go, yes, live your best life, be your authentic self, right? And it's not always the safest thing for a student to do that. And so in that regard, queer and trans youth have to develop skills that non-queer and trans youth don't have to develop. They don't have to worry about figuring out how to monitor a room and monitor an organization and who's allowed to know who I am really and who's not allowed to know who I am. And that part of the journey is particularly challenging. So that's a long answer and a vague answer, but finding other people who identify in the community, I think, is a key.
Absolutely. And when you were speaking earlier, Renee, you said something that made me think of like gay straight alliances at some bigger universities, right? But then there are those smaller ones that don't really have more people who identify as queer or something that might be able to come together, or even like staff that might be affirming. So by integrating this into high school, we're getting this information out early. We're not waiting for the possibility of maybe you went to like a school, a college, if you choose to go to college, or maybe you find a community in the future that may be more affirming to you and your identity. And then I think that goes hand in hand with this. So I'm in Florida, in Miami though, which is very, affirming and positive. But then you have like all these other bills. So you see that disconnect, right? There's a lot of people who feel the desire and the ability to advocate, but then there's the weight on the back end. So you do also find these like in between spaces. And I think that finding a place that maybe is more neutral or like loopholes kind of right through the bill, that we can integrate all this information in, helps people still have access to this information, and then takes away maybe the pressure from school counselors and administration, and because I think that there are so many people who want to do this, who believe in this, and are stopped by bills like these. So we will be able to find communities that can come together to do something about it without having to worry about all the higher up red tape kind of stuff.
Thank you both. I also just want to add, I see you, Paul. Other people, you're welcome to unmute or use the chat to ask questions. I love that this this group incorporates representation, right? Connecting with and making visible role models in the community or even in the larger kind of region that you're in, because it is so important. I think even for me as a straight Black woman, it is important for me to see other people who share parts of my identity doing things that I could never have imagined, because now I can see myself doing that thing or doing the next thing, right? And I think we can often live in spaces of isolation where we're like, well, no one's doing this. And like, I mean, I want to try, but like, I don't know how to, and like, where do I go from here? Like, it is, I think like it is, the impetus is on us to help build those aspirations and say, you see this, but like, what if we pushed even more? What could be the next thing other than what you see in your immediate surroundings? So I really appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you are alluding to a certain amount of bravery that it takes to be the person who's in position to do something and to decide to do something, right? It's not always the easy decision. And so it does take some guts, right? You have to be willing to bump up against a few people who want to shut you down and say, no, this matters. Here's why it matters, and be prepared to defend it.
I want to say something, but oh, there you are. Okay, I was going to ask you.
Well, I want to, I don't know if anyone else had questions. I also appreciate it, and this might be a long sort of front porch of comments too, but I'll get to a question, or maybe I won't. Maybe it'll just be a prompt for you to talk further about your work. But you talked about Yalom's therapeutic factors, right? And you referenced universality in particular. And so for me, and for all of us who have worked with groups, we know how important that is, right? For students to know they're not alone. And just what that does for their overall sense of self, right? And purpose and identity, which is a part of this group. I thought too, though, about as you referenced again, the hostility that they are often living through. And I wondered about those who may not yet identify because of said hostility, maybe even in their own home, which I remember in my first year as a school counselor, I had several on my caseload where that was presented. And so it even took a while to get to that point with them and having them share with me. If there's a space, coming back, that was a long parenthetical, if there's a space, and if so, how do we create the space for those who have yet to identify to be supported by such interventions like this group? How does that work? Or are all of these students kind of already identified out, et cetera, and participating in that way?
I think the way the group is written now, and we do have this in our article as a limitation of the group, right? You are automatically outing yourself if you decide to participate in this group, right? So on the surface, it's set up for people who do know that they identify in this group, or probably who think they identify in this group. For those who aren't really sure, and those who are still trying to figure that out, I think it's just so important for them to know where safe spaces are, right? I think it goes to little things like how you put decorations in your office. It goes to things like, what do you say when you do classroom guidance? And do you decide to choose to include naming certain groups? And what you know, and that you make yourself a safe and approachable person. I think it's in the who you are, who we are as people, and who we show the world that we are, that lets people know that we might be somebody that they can feel comfortable enough with to say, hey, Anita, I don't know about this, right? What do you think? Are you gonna, is it bad if this is true about me? These are the kinds of questions that kids ask, right? What does it mean about me if this is true? And so that's not a very scientific answer to your question, but that's what comes up for me is we have to be it. It just can't be a thing that we do. We have to be allies.
Definitely. And what I wanted to say before, so I'm really happy you did say this, Paul, because it applies for everybody. So I just want everyone to try it out with me really quickly. So reach your hand as far high as you can get it, right? As far high as you can go.
Right.
And then reach a little more.
Yeah.
So everybody can move their hand even higher, right? Even when we gave ourselves that limitation of this is as far high as I can go. So I think breaking through that mentality of like being able to quantify it or thinking that this is all we can do, this is that box, helps us get straight to how we're going to reach out to people who aren't really sure of who they are yet. Because there are people who come out at, like, I've worked with trans people who begin their journeys at like 50 something, right? And it's like way after a lot of your body has already developed and you're starting to get into this new phase of like development. You're starting over. So it's kind of like there's like a second adolescence is what a lot of literature considers it as. And then I think not shying away from those experiences too. So not placing a limitation on when this is appropriate. It can just be a seed that we're planting and we're saying it's okay to have these questions and to wonder for the future. And if you decide in 20 years that this is who you are and you're able to put a name on it, that's okay too. And if you want to reach out to me again in 20 years, even if I haven't seen you, that's fine. And you will find a space that is affirming for that. So planting a seed.
I wonder too, this has me thinking, so I do think, right, that there are bits and pieces of this group, and I would say any kind of group that you're doing that is maybe tailored to a specific need or a subgroup, that you can take bits and pieces and make it a part of your tier 1 classroom guidance services as a way to say, hey, this is what I'm about. There's probably some folks who need to know this. If we need to go deeper, there are these other opportunities. So I think that there's a way to not necessarily prompt, but say, hey, like, you might be questioning and you might consider, even if you don't land in the queer and trans community, it's probably just good information to know, because maybe as an ally, you want to know how to be a friend, right? Or how to be a supporter in this kind of way. So I think, I think there are bits and pieces in just looking at the group that I'm like, oh yeah, this could fit in like the typical like CCR classroom guidance that I would want to be as comprehensive and kind of reach as many people as possible, where tier 2 and tier 3 is going to be really, really tailored, like this group would be tier 2 in terms of CCR work.
I'd love to hear how you're thinking of different ways to, like, pick pieces out of it and put it into what you're already doing. And that's a fabulous takeaway that I think even anybody who isn't ready to just put the whole group on can just take some bits and pieces and work it in slowly to what they already are doing.
I'm going to skip a few of my other questions because of the time and ask this one. Is there anything that you all wanted to make sure you said to us and tell us today that maybe we haven't gotten to yet, or maybe Renee and I didn't ask about? Is there anything before we go that you want to make sure to get in?
No, except please make sure you contact us if you want to run the group, because we want to hear about it. We want to write another article about how great it went. So yeah, but no, thank you. Isabella, did you have anything else?
I want to encourage you to keep asking these questions and keep wondering what spaces allies fit into and how we can make sure to make these changes happen, right? Because by asking those questions, we are opening up the space and we're making these things possible. And we're reaching farther than what we initially assumed that we could. So keep doing what you're doing. And please let us know if you want to try this out and if you get the chance to do it. If you come up with amazing ways to be more inclusive, I would love to hear that as well.
Well, we just want to thank you both for taking some time to spend with us to share more about this work and to answer all of our questions and just keep the conversation going. Your contribution to this special issue is just a phenomenal addition, and we're so glad to have it and so glad to have your expertise as a part of the magic. So this webinar is recorded. It will be on the website very soon, so we can always go back to it and reference it. We also will have access to the blog, which is already up. So this is forever, right? Forever into the universe. Can't take it back. It is there, never going anywhere. And I'm so glad about that. I want to say thank you to Paul and Eric for helping to get the special issue together in the webinar series. And of course, the infamous and redoubtable Laura Owen for just leading, even though there's a million things that you have on your plate. I'm just so grateful for the way that you continue to show up for everything, I think, especially this. So thank you for all of your work and effort. And thank you to everyone who is able to attend or future folks who will be watching this. We appreciate you. We hope that you take some gems and are able to put it into action into your own practice. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Be well and have a happy, safe rest of your week.
And Pride Month.
And Pride Month. Yes. Happy Pride.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.